If you were a Roman soldier guarding the northern frontier of the empire, which would be worse, facing the warring Picts on Hadrian's Wall, or stuck in a tower like this in the marshes of the Netherlands, watching over the River Rhine, the main supply route into Britain? Here in Utrecht, archaeologists are making some amazing discoveries which detail what life really would have been like here on the frontier and how hard the Roman army had to work in order to keep the supply route to Britain open. Time Team have been invited to the Netherlands to help uncover that story. And you'll understand why we're just a tad excited when I tell you that one of the things that we're going to be digging over the next 3 days is a perfectly preserved Roman boat. In the Netherlands, the frontier followed the course of the River Rhine, which was the main supply route used to get goods and soldiers out to Britain, the island on the very edge of the known world. Amazingly, much of that story is preserved here, in the waterlogged soils on the outskirts of Utrecht, even though the River Rhine itself now flows further to the south. In advance of one of the biggest building projects in Europe, archaeologists have been given the chance to investigate before some 30,000 new houses completely cover this area. This picture is based on their fantastic discoveries so far, which include Roman watchtowers, forts, and the frontier road, all built alongside the River Rhine.
Yeah, there's not a problem over here. That's a river bench. We excavated one ship, a Roman ship, a couple of years ago. But now, after that one was excavated, we discovered another one, and it's still there. So we want to know the date of this ship.
So you didn't excavate?
We didn't excavate, it's still there. It's over there, just a couple of meters down there.
None of us can quite believe it. Buried just 2 meters under here is an intact Roman boat. So where's the pointy bit, the prow?
Well, we've found one end of the ship somewhere over here. And, well, we expect it to be running 30 meters in that direction.
30 meters? What, I mean, in other words, it goes right through those trees then?
Well, deep down under, really. I mean, it's going down very steep in that direction.
What makes you think it's still going to be well preserved in the ground?
Well, I hope it still is. I mean, it was there 2 years ago when, with the same conditions. I mean, it's waterlogged, really. You have the groundwater table is, well, this deep, I guess,
right,
at the moment.
We've got to find it first, haven't we?
So let's get... No, it's here, mate. And look, we've got a digger. Let's use it.
Let's get started.
Eric and Hera discovered the boat 2 years ago, but only had time to expose a fraction of it. Essentially, our goal is to find out how old it is, and personally, I can't wait to get my first glimpse of a genuine Roman boat. But we're also going to try to help sort out what was going on at the Zandveld site that was further along the river. Eric and Hera discovered a Roman watchtower in this area, but because of pottery finds in this field, they think there may be a small Roman fort here too. They're hoping Geophys might be able to locate it for them. Roman forts on this frontier were built within half a day's march of each other, and several have been excavated. The dig here at Alphenfort turned up many well-preserved Roman coins like this one, which tell a story in themselves. But proving the case for a fort at the Zandveld site is not going to be easy.
Our problem, you see, Tony, is that on that side of the ditch over there, there's going to be a lot of dumping of material in the next few weeks.
Yeah, we've got a few weeks left, actually.
So we want to look there to see what these Roman finds were that were found earlier.
Yeah.
On this side, both of these fields are scheduled, but we're only allowed one trench. So we've geophysicked in this field, and we're going to geophysick in that field, but we don't want to take a decision on where to dig until we've got both lots done.
So do we just have to sit twiddling our thumbs until geophysics has been done?
No, we can start on that trench the other side.
Excellent. So, as the first trench gets underway at the Zandveld site, I'm going to check how Phil's getting on locating our Roman boat. Phil?
Go.
Is this stuff what Eric's guys laid down last time?
Yeah, this is the polythene that's directly on top of the boat.
There she is.
I mean, listen to that. That's as solid as rock, isn't it? Eh? Super. Yeah.
Wow.
Come on, you're enjoying this,
I
aren't you?
certainly am. I mean, that could have been in the ground for 5 years, couldn't it?
But you know, it's been there for 2,000 years.
Extraordinary.
Incredible, isn't it, eh?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the beauty of it. It's not just a piece of wood. You know it is actually a boat. I mean, somebody's actually seen it. They know it's a boat. But there's just so much we don't know about it.
At this rate, we'll have it in the water again by Friday. The boat that Eric and Hera have already excavated was found just a short distance away and is of the same type as the one we're digging. It means that we know our boat should look something like this. This is a Zamadam-type river barge, named after the place where they were first discovered. These flat-bottom barges were used by the army and independent traders to move cargoes along the River Rhine. Most, like this one, have been dated to the 2nd century AD. But according to Eric, our boat could be significantly earlier, which would get the archaeologists really excited. And the preservation of the boat looks to be just as good. Phil, that piece of wood must be at least a metre below the bit that you found.
I know. But the main thing is we've now got the bottom of it. And you can see, look, there's the join between two of the planks, and it comes through underneath this main rib.
There's a heck of a lot of it there, isn't
I know.
there? Could we have the whole of the boat here, Jaap?
No, one of the ends of the ship is missing. We don't know if it's the fore or the aft, but it's above the groundwater table and completely gone, and it only left a soil mark.
Phil, what's that lump just below this new piece of wood?
Well, we've got one here, one there, and another one there.
These are big chunks of volcanic rock, and Jaap reckons they've fallen into the boat from the riverbank. Surprisingly, there's no natural stone in the Netherlands, and it appears that the Romans shipped in basalt rocks from Germany to try and stop the river eroding the road along the frontier. But right now, as we reach the end of the day, I have to admit that my attention's focused completely on our Roman boat.
In fact, what you here see is the top of this plank, the upper plank.
That's that one there.
Yeah, that one there.
So what we've got is the full height of the boat in the trench.
Yes.
Normally, when we excavate anything Roman, it comes out of the ground looking pretty ancient and bedraggled. But this is completely different. Look at the angle of this boat. It's like it was moored here yesterday. And the quality of that timber, it could have been cut last spring.
It's fantastically well preserved, isn't it?
It doesn't look ancient at all, does it? It's
no.
modern. This boat's on a steep angle, and one end some 6 metres below ground. Too deep even for geophys to detect with radar. This dig is all about exposing a 5-metre section of the barge that will allow the experts to find out exactly how old it is. And with the basalt rocks now being lifted out of the way, the diggers can set about revealing more of the boat itself. It appears our boat was abandoned here on a bend in the river. And one of the reasons it's preserved so well is that it's been covered by the wet river silts laid down as the Rhine gradually shifted over the centuries. Eric, in fact, believes that the Roman army's biggest challenge here on the frontier was battling the natural forces of the river, and that our barge may be part of that story. It's only now that we've got the basalt blocks off that you can see what a dramatic angle the boat's at.
Nobody would position a ship against a revetment with an angle like this.
So are you suggesting that they put it in that position for a particular reason, like being a pier or a quay or something like that?
Well, what we know, we've done a lot of research in the environment, and we know the river was threatening the Roman road in the background around 100 AD. This construction was made in 100 AD. We have dated the poles of the construction.
Yeah.
And its shape suggests that it was meant to protect the road from erosion.
Eric thinks that the boat was used as a barrier to stop the river eroding the bank. The Roman engineers seem to have fought a constant battle with the river as it kept shifting position. But they'd no other choice because they were surrounded by marshland and everything had to be built on this narrow ridge of sandy soil. But to find out the date means doing something fairly brutal to our boat. Shocking, I know, especially as we haven't revealed the full width of the boat yet. But I'm assured it can all be pieced back together again. Apparently, they need to take quite a few samples in order to get a dendro date, and we'll find out more about that later. Mapping the changing course of the river has been crucial in developing an understanding of the frontier. But as you might imagine, the archaeology is a tad complicated in places. This is especially true at the other site we're digging here at Zandveld. Erik and Hera's excavations found the corner posts of a Roman watchtower built beside the river in the 1st century. But 100 years later, the river had shifted, and pottery finds in this area suggested a bigger Roman presence, something like a small fort, may have been built here in the 2nd century. Essentially, the forts and watchtowers here weren't just about guarding the frontier, but were carefully positioned to control movement along the River Rhine.
I think the important thing is to realise that it's not only a military corridor. All the forts here depend on their supplies to be brought in from outside.
Right.
And these supplies are coming up from Switzerland and later on from Britain. This is the corridor that takes the trade to Scandinavia and to France.
Right.
So this is the motorway of Europe. Every bit of heavy traffic has to go on this river.
Right.
Yeah. So what you're saying is there's somewhere between sort of traffic lights or maybe like lighthouses, something like that.
Yeah.
Damien, you don't do suspense, do you?
Well, no, I mean, oh, wait a minute, that's fantastic.
Look at that.
Oh, that is a bit, God, that is a bit nice, isn't it?
Some size, isn't it?
I tell you what, when you see that against the other one that we've just looked at, that has got to be twice the size of
Something
the one
like
we've
that,
seen.
yeah. I mean, you're talking about twice the capacity at least, twice the volume of cargo.
And what amazes me too is the condition of the timbers. The timbers are every bit as good condition as what we've seen today, aren't they?
Yeah.
And the size of them too.
What's your first thoughts?
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, we should be finding these things in England. We're not, so we have to come here to find them.
They'd have had them in England.
Well, I think it's likely. We've got lots of Roman ports. We've done a lot of work in Roman port excavation, especially in London. We've got seagoing ships.
Phil's first question, though, is fairly basic. Do we now know which end we're digging?
I think there is 80% chance that we now know what end of the ship it is.
So we can say 80% certain that this end is the stern.
Yes.
The back end of the ship, yeah.
That is amazing.
What's this thing behind you that looks like a sort of, well, I don't know, looks like a fence post or something?
Well, we've been calling it the mast, but we ain't really but we ain't serious about that.
Right. Well, it does look rather round and straight.
Yeah, but there's a good archaeological reason why it's not.
Not the mast.
No, well, you see, we got those big blocks of basalt.
Oh yeah, these are the things we were fetching out yesterday.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, Jack was saying he thinks that they actually tumble in from the bank. And they've actually tumbled down across the base of the boat.
Right, yeah.
Well, now you see, there you've got basalt down there, but this pole,
dump or something.
just something that has just settled in, and I suppose as the water level's gone, it's settled against the side of the boat.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Jaap hinted that he'd seen things in this boat that make it a unique discovery. And now he plans to show Phil exactly what he meant by that. He's been busy sticking yellow pins into these planks to indicate where they've been fastened, using a mortise and tenon joint like this, a technique that's never been seen before in any of the Roman boats found here.
So what you're saying then, that these timbers are not merely joined to these, but they're joined,
together
through there.
Yes.
That explains why you get pairs of them against the joint.
But the main goal of the dig was to find out the date of this boat, and now that moment has finally arrived. According to Erik and Hera, this barge should date well before 100 AD if their theories about this frontier are to be proved right. To get the most precise date, the sample has to include the sapwood from just under the bark, as this contains the last growth rings in the tree that show exactly when it was cut down. This sample didn't have the sapwood, but it has given us an approximate date, which Esther's working on right now.
I can't wait to know.
All right, I'm showing you here. The last ring of the L-shaped piece dates in 52 AD, the last ring.
52 AD.
AD.
Right.
Add 25 rings, you come to 77 AD, plus minus 6 or something, and that's your post date.
So
77.
So we're looking at something in the early 80s. Well, I thought there'd be some reactionary. Why is that so exciting?
No, I mean, it's just about, I mean, I said 85.
Yes, you
didn't
did.
I?
Yes, I had 55, so I'm way out.
I said 71. I said 71.
Is this exactly the time that you wanted?
Yes, I mean, if you asked me this morning, I mean, the only thing I could think of, when was the first serious phase of construction on this land infrastructure?
Yeah.
To my opinion, it began around 85 AD. That's after 7 years of research. So, that was my guess.
So as well as all this infrastructure going in, they're getting the shipping sorted out to bring the
bulk
supplies.
carriers were constructed. So that was my guess.
I think they're quite happy with this date, Esther.
It's always good about Esther always brings the good news.
It's a great finish to the dig and their project in this area.
Oh, now you can really see its boat shape, isn't it?
But given the importance of this barge, I have to ask them, is there any chance the rest of the boat will ever be excavated?
If the groundwater level lowers and we notice that, there's degeneration of the wood, I think you call time team.
You think there's the possibility that one day we might get the phone call?
You might.
Come and dig the whole boat.
I think, we have to reschedule time team and do it in 4 days, I think.
We might just do that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Wouldn't it be great if we could just pull this entire barge out of the ground right now? Well, with the magic of graphics, we can do just that. This way, we can see the full scale of this unique river barge, which measured just under 5 metres wide and something like 35 metres long. This is the missing link, as Damien calls it, the earliest example of a Rhine river barge. It was constructed most likely for the Roman army, using a mix of local and Mediterranean shipbuilding techniques. Built around 85 AD, this barge seems to have had a working life of 15 years before it was deliberately sunk around 100 AD to stop the River Rhine eroding the frontier road, a desperate measure by the Roman engineers fighting a constant battle against the forces of nature. And now there's just enough time to share the news with the people who did all the hard work. Ladies and gentlemen, the dendro date for our barge is, give or take 5 years, 85 AD, which makes it the earliest Roman barge ever discovered on the northern frontier.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
This is Piercebridge on the River Tees, and you can see exactly why we might want to come here. The entire village is inside one of the most fascinating Roman forts in the country. But that's all over there. The reason we're here is to find out what's going on down there. Over the last 20 years, 2 local divers have pulled more than 2,000 objects out of this stretch of the Tees, like this lovely figurine and this little fish here, beautiful gold ring. And intriguingly, all of it came from one little area in the middle of the river. And on top of that, they think they found the remains of a couple of wooden bridges. So what does that fort up there have to do with all this down here? The whole place is a riddle. Let's hope we can get to the bottom of it. Did you make these?
I did. I got my Blue Peter badge for it as well. This is the modern bridge now with the road bridge. We found this structure with the oak piles up here.
Do you think that's a bridge?
We think it is because we've got a concrete pier there. We're not too sure if it's Roman or medieval. We're not too sure. Down here, we've got all the wooden piles and there's a wooden platform there. So the mystery is what's going on here.
Ben, we've got a shed load of finds, we've got the fort, we've got bridges. What on earth do we do?
There's a lot to be getting on with, isn't there?
So we're not just going to be messing around in the river all the time?
No, obviously we will be in the river. That's hugely important to get in there and get recording that. But we're also going to be having a look at this context up on the banks and around about. There's plenty of stuff to explore up there as well.
So we know about the fort and the big Roman stone bridge that spanned the Tees here. But there are 2 mysteries Bob and Rolf want us to resolve. First, why have they found so many objects in the middle of the river? And second, what are the wooden structures on the river bed? Have they found 2 more bridges? Or are they jetties or some sort of water mill? There's only one way to find out.
What I do want to do is get to the end of this timber just to give myself some idea of the size of this thing.
It's only when you're up close that you start to appreciate the scale of whatever this thing was. These beams are clearly enormous, and if they're Roman, then they've been lying here on the bottom of the river for the past 2,000 years.
That's a good width. You could drive a modern lorry over that. And it's probably wider than that then.
Oh, it is. Well, this disappears into the silt. It's going to be a lot longer.
That is incredible. And it's all one continuous piece of timber.
Good old English oak, Phil.
Fantastic.
And what about the other enigma we've come here to resolve? Why this vast hoard of Roman objects was found on the riverbed? Philippa, I know you've only just started cataloguing the stuff with Bob and Ralph, but are you getting any kind of picture of what was happening here?
Well, there's just so much to look at, but what I can tell you is that there's some really interesting things going on at the site. For a start, there seem to be a lot of religious objects amongst what we're finding here.
Religious, so these could be votive offerings, things that people just chuck in the river for the gods?
Exactly right. And it looks like all these objects are coming from a very small area in the river, about 4 metres by 14 metres. So I think people were deliberately throwing stuff into just one small area.
But Phil, look what I picked up.
It's the shoe off one of those piles. Beautiful. I mean, this is the actual tip that was driven into the riverbed. We've got this lovely piece of wrought iron hammered right out. And then this piece up here, and you can actually see the imprint of the wood preserved in the corrosion.
Alongside the timber beams, we've now found one of the iron spikes used to anchor them into the riverbed. Whatever this thing was, it was formidable. But we've still got the other set of wooden remains to look at further upriver. It's just as well I brought my flippers.
Loaded away. Yeah. Whoa, it's a little bit cold. Slightly.
All right, enough of this faffing about. Let the professionals through. There are no horizontal timbers this time, just the remains of a wooden post. It's quite narrow at the top with a sort of notch in, isn't it?
It's narrow at the top, but it broadens down, you say. They're quite substantial. These are big posts. That's a big post, that.
Let's have a look at the second one.
Look at this one, yeah.
In fact, Bob and Rolf have found 7 posts in 2 parallel rows. And then there's this massive lump of concrete. Could this be what's left of a pier? Do you think it could be Roman?
I think there's every chance it could be, yeah. There's a lot like a bridge or a jetty or something. I mean, those posts are big and big lumps of concrete.
It's quite extraordinary. We've got some substantial remains over there, which we think might have been part of a big Roman bridge. Phil thinks he's got a second Roman bridge over there. We seem to have another bridge here. This site's getting curiouser and curiouser. Here at Piercebridge in County Durham, where we're getting to grips with what we think might be the remains of 3 Roman bridges in the River Tees. But while most of us have our eyes firmly fixed on what's happening on the riverbeds down here, over here, what looks like a breakaway faction of rebel archaeologists appears to be opening a trench in a field that even more bizarrely is nowhere near the river.
So John, where are we on this geophys then?
I think we've got a little rectangular building here.
Yeah.
It's on a different alignment to the fort. So we're going from the middle, across the wall, possible ditch outside.
Yeah.
I have two big questions about this site. Firstly, why are we excavating this little field when the river's actually about 200 metres in that direction? But secondly, and probably more importantly, what on earth is Mick Aston doing here? Mick wasn't scheduled to be on this dig. Ben's in charge, not you.
Yep.
You don't like Roman archaeology, and yet you wheedled your way into it.
Yeah, well, it's because it's County Durham and it's the Tees Valley. And we've done quite a lot of sites in this area already. And I'm interested in where this fits in to the overall picture, because we're very near Stanwick, which is a big prehistoric complex. And we're in the Tees Valley where we've got Gainford and Barnard Castle from the medieval period.
Do you see that, John? The reason he's here has got nothing to do with the Romans at all. He's interested because of what might have preceded the Romans and what came after them.
Yeah.
But Ben, you're interested in the Romans,
Definitely interested in the Romans, yeah. And the reason why we're here is because there's been a lot of excavation around Piercebridge. Wonderful tomb here, you know, you just feel the weight of it, a huge amount of excavation. But it's all taken place over there to the east. Loads of buildings, some sort of village-like settlement over there, but no one's actually been over here on the west side. Have we got a small village just contained over there? Have we got something much larger, something like a small town?
Mick, do you think whatever we find here might help us illuminate what's going on down at the river?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this has never been looked at. So...
well, it has been now.
Except for this morning with you, Dean. Yeah, but, so we don't know what's here, really.
Well, we do. We're starting to get a really exciting picture, I think. We've surveyed it magnetically. You can see the corner of the fort. It shows really clearly. And then we've got a mass of anomalies extending across the field.
Do you think all this here might be human activity rather than just geology?
I'm sure it is. When you look at the detail, some of the ditches are on the same alignment as the fort, but others are clearly on a differing alignment. What I think we may have is an earlier settlement and that the fort has been slapped on top of it.
Naomi? Yeah? You've got a little bit of bone here. Presume that's animal bone. I think there's, is that some kind of butchery mark on
That's
there?
definitely a butchery mark. It's a rib from a large mammal, such as like a horse or a cow. So yeah, evidence of butchery.
The good news is we've found evidence there was human activity next to the fort. The bad news is we don't know when. Though it looks like we might be getting a date from the river. So what do you think, Meg?
It's wooden, but it's not got that many rings in it. There's only about 30 in this piece, and I need 50 plus.
So can you do anything with it?
Not with this one, but we're going to try and sample more of the timbers that's down there.
If you do find a piece that's got 50 or more rings in, will you be able to date it for us before the end of our 3 days?
Yes, if I can find the right sample.
Meanwhile, I don't know what John had with his cornflakes this morning, but he's already finished geophysing in this field. We were hoping he might pick up traces of any roads running down to meet our bridges.
There's your bridge, Ben, cutting through here. There's no sign in my data of a sort of road going on a north-south alignment. I mean, clearly we've got lots of responses. We've got these very, very strong ditch-like responses, but there, in the middle of the field there, where the sheep are, we've not gone quite as far as your bridge yet, Phil, but at the moment, we're not really answering all the questions.
I'm not quite so worried. This is good stuff. There's great anomalies there. Maybe this is a roadside ditch. It's just that the road has to curve round to take this steep incline down to the river.
So, even though there's no trace of one, Ben's convinced there is a road here somewhere. So we're going to open a third trench to try and find it. Not that we're clutching at straws. Back in Phil's trench, there's no sign of any road. But he has made a remarkable discovery.
I've got this fragment of skull in there. Is this a grave? I just need your confirmation. That is human.
Yeah, that's no problem. Just by looking at it, you've got this nice uniform thickness. And that is just screaming at me, that is definitely human.
Because look, what else I found? I was just...
Aha!
Look, that's a piece of a very small shell bracelet.
That is lovely.
Stuart thinks he's found another road running down to Ben's bridge back on the other side.
This is getting really exciting from my point of view, because what we're seeing is a link back to Stanwick's Hill Fort, which is 3 kilometres down the road. Biggest Iron Age hill fort in this part of the world, major tribal centre. It's 320 hectares. It's a huge, huge site. But the really interesting thing that relates to is this routeway. It links Stanwick's right down to Piercebridge here. And heads towards where we've got the string line across the river and where there are some timbers in the riverbed.
So there's an outside chance that the piles themselves are prehistoric and not Roman.
It would be really nice if they were, wouldn't it? I mean, that'd be marvellous.
This is terrific. John may have picked up Deer Street on Geophys. Now Stuart reckons he's identified an older prehistoric road running all the way up to Bensbridge here. So is the bridge also prehistoric? To answer that, we need a tree ring date. Though poor old Mick looks like he's still struggling.
The problem is, I float rather, and I can't get down deep enough to cut it. So I'm going to bring my stunt double in here, Bob. So Bob's going to have to go in there and do it. So basically, I need to get as low as you possibly can.
Right.
Further downstream, we're getting more fantastic finds. Wait.
Oh, hi.
Oh, let's have a look.
Ah.
Oh.
Gee. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful, isn't it? What do you think that is precisely?
Oh, well, we've got a very nice copper alloy pin there, bronze to you and me, but it must be a hairpin of some description. Look, there's a little sort of piercing through the middle, but with this glass bead on the end. I think this is interesting about this is it means women. It must mean women. Yeah. And of course the Roman army is followed around by all sorts of women, some wives, but also women of certain reputations only too happy to help those soldiers spend their earnings.
Stuart, where does all this water come from?
Well, from the river, obviously.
Yes, thank you very much.
No, this river goes, we've got a 30-mile run that way, right up into the mountains and moorlands in Cumbria. It might only rain for half an hour here, but it's been raining for 2 or 3 days up there. It comes in literally waves, it builds up in torrents. And it's not just the power of the water that erodes the banks and bridges, it's the boulders and cobbles it brings with it. There's loads of them deposited down there, they're that big. Can you imagine them hitting the bridge, weakens the structure? After a while, you're going to get sick of repairing these timber bridges and so on. So let's build a nice big stone pier bridge over there that's going to last for generations. That's why you have to kind of react to that sort of power of the river.
The divers who invited us here gave us 2 objectives, didn't they? One was to sort out the bridges, or the remnants of them, which we found in the river. But the other was to solve the mystery of all these finds in the river. Yeah. Are we going to be able to meet those objectives?
I think we're nearly there. We've got a bit more work to do up on the banks, and then, you know, hopefully that will give us more... I'm confident it will give us more of an idea about what's actually going on in the river.
It might not be a raging torrent, but the strength of the current makes working out here far too dangerous. It's frustrating, certainly, but it does at least demonstrate the destructive power of the river, which we decided last night must have undermined the north bank here, causing a great chunk of the cliff to collapse into the water, taking part of the Roman town with it. It's hard to imagine a more dramatic episode in the history of Piercebridge. Hang on, this is disastrous. If we can't get dates from the bridges, we've got no chance of telling the story of this place. On top of that, our radar survey hasn't worked either.
And the problem is that there's so many big boulders down there that the energy's hitting those, it's bouncing back up off them, and we're not getting the penetration that would answer that question.
Right, so it's the energy of the radar as well, but this is about the energy of the river as well. It's transported all those boulders, strewn them across the bottom, and it's stopped us from looking at the archaeology.
That's it, yeah.
It looks like the mystery of the bridges will remain unresolved, although there is one small glimmer of hope up on the escarpment. Faye, you've just about finished here, haven't you?
Yes, we have. I mean, we've found what we came to look for. We've got our Roman road, Deer Street.
It's really vivid in the landscape there, isn't it?
It looks fantastic, doesn't it? And actually, we also have our ditches on the other side. So we've got one there and one coming in over there as well.
And of course, this street, Deer Street, goes slap bang to our middle bridge, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's what must date it, because that's when the Romans conquer the north.
So give us a date.
The big Roman push into the north is in the 70s and early 80s AD.
Terrific, we've found Deer Street. Better still, it lines up exactly with our middle bridge here. So we think they must have been constructed at the same time, in the late 1st century AD.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
On a bitterly cold night in January 1439, the Dieu was lying silently at anchor, surrounded by 3 smaller royal ships. The story goes that this huge royal battleship was struck by lightning and burnt to the water. Strangely enough, the other ships weren't damaged. Nearly 600 years later, the skeleton of a huge ship is still visible on the bottom of the river. John Adams, who was one of the leading archaeologists on the Mary Rose, has no doubt this is the Dieu.
We're going to put a trench over the stern and look at a part of the structure that we think most information is going to come from in the time available to us.
On a practical note, how the hell are we going to get the dirt out?
Well, we're going to excavate essentially just as you do on land, with trowels, paintbrushes, etc. But we'll suck the spoil away with a water suction dredge, and that has the effect of keeping the visibility a little bit clearer.
Henry V was the most powerful king in Europe after defeating the French at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. In just one day, the English wiped out most of the French nobility. Even though Agincourt was the last great land battle of the 100 Years' War, the French and their powerful allies, the Genoese, posed a continual threat on the seas with their huge warships called carracks. Henry V kept his Royal Navy here in the Hamble River. Unlike Southampton, which had been raided several times by the Genoese, the Hamble was a safe anchorage, protected from the invaders by a chain across the river mouth. So we are looking for an enormous ship. She carried a fighting force of at least 200 men, and we think her forward castle, or forecastle, was 50 feet above the waterline. That's 3 times the height of a double-decker bus. But as our experts can't agree about most of the other dimensions, one of our targets is to define her actual size. But why did they build her so big?
It had to be larger than the largest ship the enemies of England could throw against it. And those were the Genoese carracks, the big Mediterranean sailing vessels of the allies of the French. And the Dieu is about 3 times as large as the largest carrack.
We think that at least 17 ships of Henry V's Royal Navy were maintained and overhauled at Bursledon, a mile towards the sea from our site. Stuart would like to know more about this busy village in the time of Henry V. With so much royal business, Bursledon docks must have been a focal point for trade. If Stuart can locate the medieval shoreline, then he can begin to piece together the layout of the ancient port. The tides in the river churn up all sorts of silt and weed, and the underwater visibility is very poor, so John has designed a special enclosure. This paddling pool-looking device is called the sea curtain. Once anchored over the trench, the sides can be let down and secured to form a tank. The water inside can then be pumped out through a filter and returned into the enclosure, clear of silt. Well, that's the theory, but it's already taken half the day just to inflate it and get it in the water. It's just after lunch and the tide is slowing down. John's getting ready to dive.
Chin up just a little bit, mate. Yeah, in, fingers.
Everything else is ready. Each diver has a companion on standby in case there's a problem.
Contents gauge. Carabiner. Suit inflation. You okay? Get diver in the water, please.
But there's little point in Phil and I taking the place of the 2 working divers until the visibility is far better and they've started to uncover the wreck.
Left surface.
John has chosen to dig across the stern of the ship in a trench about 2 by 2.5 metres. The depth of water at the moment is only 2 metres, but the tide's still running, The visibility is extremely poor, and there's a huge amount to get ready before the serious archaeology can begin. John's still positioning the anchors for the sea curtain. I was rushing around like crazy till just after lunch, and now everything's just gone, ugh. That's really frustrating.
Why? What?
Well, nothing's happening. Look at this thing. It took them hours to blow this up, and it's just been sitting in the water forever.
Well, look, no, I mean, I disagree with you. I mean, I know it's disappointing. I want to go and see this boat, don't get me wrong. I mean, it looks like at least I've got my feet in the water. But, I mean, look, this is a difficult exercise. A lot of it is experimental. That has never been tried before. So, I mean, we've got to get it out there, we've got to test it, and we can't run it until we've done all this.
The first people to investigate the wreck were the Victorians, who thought the Grace Dieu was a huge Viking ship because her hull was clinker built. This was an ancient technique using horizontal overlapping boards, still used today in small boats. The wreck diggers noticed the old ship's hull was made up of not one, but 3 planks of oak fastened together with huge ship's nails. Nothing like this had ever been seen before, and not surprisingly, archaeologists since have been asking questions.
232 in the main, all functioning correctly. Ready to hat the diver. You happy, Phil?
I am overjoyed. I can't tell you how long I've waited for this. Good.
It's mid-afternoon on day 2, and Phil's moment has finally come.
You happy?
I am absolutely happy.
Diver 2 ready to enter the water.
But there's a problem. John hasn't been able to secure the sea curtain to the river bed properly, and the water exchange isn't working. So Phil's going to have to take a chance with the visibility. Tony to Phil, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tony.
What's it like down there?
Like a pea soup, actually.
Can you see anything of the boat?
You've got to bear with me, Tony, because I cannot see a single thing.
What can you feel?
There it is, now that makes sense. And that is, unquestionably, Grace Dieu.
These are really tough conditions even for the most experienced divers. And a scarf joint. One of the main tasks today is to establish the length of the boards that form the clinker hull. Colin McEwen, who's diving with Phil at the moment, is measuring one of the hull planks.
Right, could you just give me a measurement from the scarf joint at the end that's free back to the farthest point away that you can get? Understood?
Yeah, understood. Topside, diver 1.
Topside.
Can you tell John the plank is 2.43 metres long?
This is a new discovery. Everyone thought the ship had been built using boards no longer than 2 metres.
2.43, roger that.
But now the moment has come. As I get closer, I'm trying to imagine all those medieval shipwrights putting her together. Why those mutinous sailors abandoned her. Maybe she wasn't struck by lightning.
Phil to Tony, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Are you as amazed as you should be?
It's really fantastic. When I first got down, the visibility was just like being in a swimming pool. But there's so much of it here, Phil.
I know, it just seems so bizarre. I mean, we two who've actually seen it are giggling and bubbling to us over a couple of idiots.
Phil's absolutely right. You can't possibly tell how big she is until you get down here. Now I can see for myself the massive frame timbers, with the side of the ship disappearing away. The ballast, I assume, as there's no other reason for flints to be in here. And until you see how close together these enormous timbers are that step down towards the stern, you can't appreciate the scale of this ship. The The Grace Dieu heralded the end of the great clinker ships. By the time Henry VIII launched the Mary Rose nearly 100 years later, the old clinker technology had given way to a radically different carvel design, using parallel boards fixed edge to edge onto a rigid frame. This morning, Francis and Stuart started to look for the medieval shoreline in Bursledon. One of their targets was the remains of a storehouse near the old dried-up creek.
This is the storehouse. We've gone down and we've hit lots of rocks. And I think these are footings for walls or something like that. We don't know what date they are. But next door, right, dug a little hole and came up with this. Now that makes me very excited. It's a bit of pottery dated about 1450. So that is right on the money for the Grace Dieu. And then we've also found in that trench a large-headed nail that could be something to do with ships, but we don't know for sure yet.
What does it tell us?
Well, what it tells us is what Bursledon is in the late 15th century. Bursledon seems to be, I think we're right in our original assumptions, between there and just beyond the main road which exists today. So that's the Bursledon of the 16th century with the creek out in front of it.
So if Stuart's right, this dried-up creek just by the church could have been at the heart of medieval Bursledon and the centre of a royal shipbuilding business which would grow and diversify for centuries to come, or at least until the railways came along. Carenza has discovered that the practicalities of building the Grace Dieu were astounding. It's a remarkable testament to the courage and ambition of those medieval shipwrights.
I mean, what's really struck me is the sheer quantities of everything that was required to build it. I mean, there's thousands of gallons of tar and pitch are needed to waterproof it, 38 tons of rope for the sails, never mind anything else for the sails. There's 23 tons of iron required to make 52,000 pounds of nails. That's just the nails on the ship.
And that's without the acres of timber that you need to hold together.
I mean, the figures for that are unbelievable, aren't they? 2,735 oak trees, 1,145 beech trees. That doesn't include all the timber that came from abroad.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I mean, some of it came from the Baltic. You've got wainscot boards, and you've got regols, which are timber from Riga, and you've got Prussian deal, which again is all from the Baltic, coming into the East Coast ports here.
And then there's the fitting out, the anchors. It's got 24 anchors, and the largest one is 17 feet high.
That anchor had a name. It was called Tinctor, and it survives in the royal accounts right up to the time of Henry VII.
Over the 3 days, we've discovered a lot more about the Grace Dieu. From the sonar geophysics, we think that she measured about 120 feet long at the keel. And when you take into account the overhanging bow and stern, she was probably longer than 200 feet. And there's no doubt that she was very broad, over 50 feet at the widest point. John's discovered a lot of new technical information, from the length of the hull planking to the sizes and arrangement of the stern timbers. As a ship, we can't say if she was a success or a failure, because through no fault of her own, the Grace Dieu was a battleship without a war. There's no doubt that if she'd gone out in anger, she could have overpowered her enemies, but would she have lasted the ravages of the wind and the sea? That we shall never know.
This was always going to be a difficult shoot, what with the untried technology, and the very fast-flowing river, and the bad visibility. And there were times when I thought we weren't going to get anywhere. But actually, we know far more about the Grace Dieu than we did 3 days ago, and that's why we came here. The rest of the time team have gone home, but I've got to have just one more look.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.